So good afternoon. My name is Robin McIntosh, president of the Aldergrove Fair, and today we get the pleasure of interviewing Mary Twemlow, who has been a part of the Aldergrove Fair. When was your first year that you participated in the fair?
The first time I participated was with the Coghlan Women's Institute back in the early 1950s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what was your first entry?
I can't recall my first entry, but what they used to do, the Women's Institute had a space given to them at the fair, about 10 feet, in wall space and table space. And there were several different entries as part of the overall competition between the Women's Institutes in the area. Mm-hmm. And each member of the Women's Institute would contribute towards the display. And I would enter either canning or baking. I can't recall exactly what the entries were.
Well, it certainly sounds like a lot of fun and a lot of camaraderie.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. Yeah, and my mother-in-law got me involved just shortly after Bill and I got married, so I've been involved off and on, over since that time.
Good. Now, what was your peak, would you say? Was it the 1980s, the 60s?
I'd say the late 1980s.
Yes.
I rejoined in 1987. I'd been working for 21 years and didn't have a lot of time to contribute, but once I retired, I rejoined and took part in preparing for the fair and displaying entries in the fair.
Yeah. Now, at some point, one year, what was your biggest year how many entries did you make?
Well, I put in 110 entries one year.
Wow.
And I think we counted there were 85 ribbons.
That almost sounds like a record.
It was, I think. Yeah. That would have been the biggest year, but there was a few years there in the late 80s, early 90s that I put in a lot of entries, plus volunteered at the fair, and I was in charge of the photography section and setting up the display for the fair, plus getting all my entries into the fair.
Yes. Now, I think you told me one time that one of the hard times that not hard, but difficult, what would you say, occurred around the photography? Wasn't it where you had a difficult day where you were trying to count the photographs, or what was that story?
Is that when I was putting in all my entries and trying to set
Yes.
up? I think we had a record number of entries into the photography, plus I had my 110 entries to set up, and so it was a pretty late night getting everything in order, getting it prepared.
Getting it all prepared for the next day.
Oh, yeah.
And now, you've also really encouraged your children and grandchildren to participate.
Yes, my twin grandsons, from the time they were quite young, I forget exactly what age, they were born in 1990, so it would have been the late 90s. They began entering photography. One of them entered photography, and both of them entered garden produce. I gave them a little patch of my garden area, and they grew their own gardens and displayed their produce.
I think that's one of the keys to the success back then, was being able to get your family involved.
Yes, and then in addition to that, I had two stepchildren that also entered hobbies, scrapbooks, that type of thing, and also the boys did that as well. And my son entered photography. And then I also had 2 nieces that sent in entries, one from Port Alberni and one from Kamloops, and so they put entries into the photography.
We should have called it the provincial fair. Do you have a favorite memory of the fair from your days of entering? And
nothing really specific, it was all fun.
Yeah. And educational too, isn't it?
Educational and interesting.
So I think what you've reached at is the key is to actually get somebody involved in the family and then get the whole family involved. That seemed to work.
Oh, it did. Oh, yeah. Everybody got really quite enthused, you know. And there was, I think there was 10 members of us all one year, from the family that were involved.
Oh, that's really excellent. So, Mary, would you like to tell us about any bloopers that you came across?
Yeah, there was one blooper I recall quite well. It was when we were still at the Aldergrove Elks Hall, and there wasn't an awful lot of space. We were sort of outgrowing the space we had in the hall, and so a lot of the displays were set up outside. And of course we opened on a Saturday and everything was judged, and then it was going to be open the next day as well, so we had all our produce and baking out on tables outdoors, and everybody was pretty tired, and the couple that were looking after that area decided everything would be all right as it was, and so we all went home for the night, and we got back the next morning to find the crows had been there before us.
No.
And some of the fruit and vegetables, they'd been pecked to pieces, and it was quite a mess. So it took us a while to sort of straighten everything out and make it look a little bit presentable for the crowd coming for that day.
That might explain why we try to do it all indoors now.
Right. Especially that part of it, for sure. Yeah.
And as we talked about earlier, we are having less entries than in your heyday. And so, being a wise woman that you are with this, can you tell us maybe some of your thoughts of how we can improve our entries to be similar to the gala days when you were entering in the 80s and 90s?
Well, the only thing, like when I was involved, I felt that maybe if I put in a lot of entries and people saw the entries, it might inspire them to compete. They may say, well, mine would look better than that, so.
A little competition.
That's right. And hopefully I just felt that it would encourage people maybe to try their luck at it.
So as soon as we get a few people to enter, and they get to demonstrate to their friends and their friends and their friends, sort of like
that's right.
That commercial.
It mushrooms. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And the same with the photography. I used to talk to a lot of my family members that were interested in photography and get them to submit entries for that.
Well, this has been a really pleasure to interview you, and I hope we weren't too much trouble on your day.
No, I don't mind anything for the Aldergrove Fair. I've always liked to see it succeed, and hopefully we can build up more entries and people getting involved.
Well, thank you very much, and maybe we'll be back next year.
I hope so.
We'll talk to you soon.
You bet.